Don't mention her military career tonight. It makes people ask questions I don't need. That was my husband's instruction to his fiancée. 11 minutes before I walked through the ballroom doors. The champagne flute in Lauren's hand paused halfway to her lips. Not curious, not confused. Just very, very still. The way a room gets when it realizes something irreversible has already started. Brigadier General Howard Stanton was already seated near the podium. He had pinned the bronze star on my chest 14 years earlier, at a ceremony Daniel missed because of a client dinner. He had received my husband's invitation to the reception. He had no idea. They were the same man. My left shoulder had gone stiff somewhere around the time I pulled into the parking lot. A fragment of metal the size of a $50, still lodged near my shoulder blade from Kandahar in 2009, had always known things before I did. I had learned to listen to it. I want to tell you that walking into that ballroom felt like something earned. It didn't. It felt like the last sound a bone makes when it finally gives. Quiet, final, already a little past the point of hurting. 22 years of service had taught me that the most dangerous ambushes are the ones wearing ordinary clothes. 3 weeks before that night, I had reported for a new assignment and walked into a workspace that smelled of fresh paint and warm coffee. I had no idea that what I was about to find on a colleague's desk would take apart everything I thought my life was built on. But to understand what happened in that ballroom, you need to understand what I found that morning first. My name is Margaret Holloway. Most people who know me call me Meg, which is shorter and also how I prefer things. Clean, without ceremony, nothing wasted on the packaging. I spent 22 years in the United States Army, most of them in logistics and defense contracting coordination. I had deployed to Kuwait, to Afghanistan, twice, to locations I still don't name in casual conversation, not out of secrecies, but because the full answer belongs to the people who paid for it with their own years. I had a bronze star and a ribbon rack that made strangers at airports ask questions. I answered briefly, out of courtesy. I was 44 years old. I had been married to Daniel Holloway for 16 years. We met at a backyard barbecue outside Fort Sam Houston in San Antonio. He was a civilian procurement consultant working with a defense firm that had contracts near the base. He was funny, confident, easy to talk to in a way that felt like honesty rather than performance. I was 30 years old and had just come back from my first deployment. I thought I knew how to read people. I was not wrong about everything. He was funny. He was confident. The part I missed was smaller and took longer to surface. In the first 5 years of our marriage, Daniel called me every night I was deployed. Not briefly. For an hour, sometimes longer. He learned the names of every person in my command. He sent care packages addressed in his own handwriting, not printed labels. Because he said handwriting was the difference between something sent and something meant. I believed that. I held on to it through dust storms and missed holidays, and the particular loneliness of being very far from home. I don't know exactly when it changed. These things rarely happen on any single day. They accumulate the way debt accumulates, gradually, then all at once, and the number is always larger than you were ready for. There is a particular silence that grows in a marriage when one person starts keeping things to themselves. Not dramatic secrets. Just the ordinary traffic of an inner life that stops finding its way to the surface. The silence doesn't announce itself. It moves in slowly, disguised as peace, and you mistake it for contentment, because contentment is quieter than you expected, and you were very busy, and the mission in front of you kept demanding your full attention. I had been very busy. The mission always demanded my full attention. These were true things, and they were also. I understand now the reasons I was easy to keep things from. Not because I wasn't paying attention. Because the attention I had was directed outward, and the gap it left behind was the shape of something Daniel eventually decided to fill with a different story entirely. When I made Major, Daniel took me to dinner in Austin and ordered champagne. He smiled across the table and said, "I always knew you would." When I made Lieutenant Colonel, he was traveling and sent flowers to the office instead. Roses. Nice enough. When I made Colonel, he forgot entirely until my mother called the house to congratulate me, and he had to pretend his silence had been about giving me space, rather than the fact that he had simply lost track. That was 4 years ago. I remember standing in our kitchen in my dress uniform, looking at the vase of grocery store carnations he had ordered online that afternoon. I noticed the pattern that evening. I just didn't know what to call it yet. 14 months before the morning that changed everything, Daniel left the procurement firm where he had worked for 11 years. He said he was transitioning to independent consulting. More freedom, better margins, less travel. He said he wanted to be more present. Present. That word had always been the gap between us, and I had always been willing to believe it could declose. On a Tuesday morning in September, I arrived at Fort Belvoir, Virginia, for my new command assignment. The Administrative Operations Building was glass-fronted, clean-hauled, smelling of commercial cleaner and recycled air. A civilian receptionist greeted me by rank and escorted me to the Defense Contracting Coordination Office, where I would oversee a team of 14. The shared workspace was large and open, divided by frosted glass partitions. My desk sat near a window overlooking the motor pool. The desk adjacent to mine belonged to a civilian project coordinator named Lauren Kessler. She was 31 years old, dark auburn hair, good posture, the kind of natural warmth that makes people lean forward in their chairs without knowing they're doing it. She stood when I approached and offered her hand with a directness I immediately respected. "Colonel Holloway, I'm so glad to finally meet you. Meg is fine outside of meetings." She smiled. "Then I'm just Lauren." I set down my briefing folders and opened my laptop. For 20 minutes, I did what I always did on a first day. Built the priority list. Contract audits, personnel reviews, budget timelines. My mind is good at organizing things in order. It had to be. In the places I had worked before, the cost of getting the order wrong was not a quarterly shortfall. Then my eyes moved without instruction to Lauren's desk. A succulent in a blue clay pot. A coffee mug from a lighthouse in Maine. A legal pad with neat handwriting. And in the corner, catching the morning light from the window, a silver picture frame. I didn't mean to look directly at it, but I did. Daniel's face looked back at me. Not someone who resembled him. Not someone who could be mistaken for him at the right angle or in insufficient light. Daniel. The same jaw. The same way he held his shoulders back when he was pleased with himself. The same expression he wore in every photograph where he knew he looked good. He was wearing a white linen shirt I had never seen, standing somewhere coastal, sun-bleached wood, a blue railing, blue water behind him. I picked up my pen. I looked back at my documents. I breathed in through my nose, slowly, counting to 4. A technique I had not learned in therapy but in a convoy briefing outside Kandahar, from a master sergeant who told me that the breath is the only thing you fully control when everything else is already gone. My left shoulder tightened. Just a pull. The metal fragment still sitting in the muscle near my shoulder blade had opinions about pressure, about stress, about things I had not yet consciously admitted to myself. I had learned over 15 years to treat it as data. It was telling me something now. I kept my eyes on my work for 23 minutes. Then, when Lauren returned from the coffee station, I looked up with the expression I kept ready for briefings. The expression of a person making ordinary conversation. "That's a nice photo," I said. Lauren turned. Her face did what faces do when they're about to talk about someone they love. A particular brightening. A slight lean forward as if the subject had gravity. "Oh, that's my fiancé." She picked it up carefully. "His name is Daniel. We're getting married in the spring." Fiancé, not boyfriend, not someone she was seeing, not anything with ambiguity built into it. Fiancé. "He seems wonderful," I said. My voice sounded completely normal. That surprised me faintly. "He really is." She set the photo down with the care of someone handling something irreplaceable. "We've been together almost 3 years. He proposed on my birthday last November. I still can't quite believe it. 3 years. 3 years." The arithmetic assembled itself without permission. 3 years ago, we had celebrated our 13th anniversary at a restaurant I had made reservations for 6 weeks in advance, because that was how I did things. And Daniel had arrived 20 minutes late because a call ran long, and I had told him it was fine. I had told him many things were fine. "Congratulations," I said. "Thank you." She tilted her head slightly. "Do you have someone?" "I do," I said, and I went back to my work. The first rule of gathering intelligence is that you never confirm what you know until you know all of it. You observe, you collect. You let the picture develop on its own schedule rather than reaching for it before it's ready. 22 years had made that less a strategy and more a reflex. Over the next 2 days, I paid attention to Lauren the way I paid attention to everything in the field. with a patience that looked like disinterest and was its opposite. I learned that she had grown up in Charlottesville, that she had a sister in Nashville and a golden retriever named Charlie, that she worked late on Thursdays, and I learned that she talked about Daniel the way people talk about the central fact of their lives. He had told her, she mentioned on our second afternoon, that he never wanted to marry someone in the military. He respected service, she said carefully, but he wanted stability. Someone whose calendar he could read more than 6 weeks in advance. Someone who wouldn't, and here she paused, choosing his phrasing delicately, always have a higher obligation than the people right in front of them. Not angry, not accusatory, just reporting what she'd been told, the way people report things they've accepted as true. I filed it. I did not respond. That same Thursday evening, I stood at the second-floor window under the pretense of reviewing an email. Lauren walked to the parking lot below. A dark gray SUV pulled up. The driver got out. I recognized the way Daniel moved, before I could make out his face. The particular set of his shoulders. The way he checked his watch, crossing a parking lot, as if time were something he owned outright, and liked to confirm was still in his possession. He opened the passenger door for her. Lauren laughed at something he said before she even got in. I watched the SUV until it cleared the gate. Then I sat in my car for 11 minutes before starting the engine and driving home. That night, I opened my laptop at the kitchen counter and called Major Karen Wells at 7:43. While the dinner I had made sat on the stove, going cold. Karen had been judge advocate for 14 years before moving into private family law. We had served together at Fort Wainwright in Alaska. She answered on the second ring. Meg! A beat. You don't call after 7 unless something's happened. I need to think out loud. I'll get coffee. I told her everything in the order it had happened, the way I had been trained to give situation reports. Factual, sequential, stripped of interpretation. The photo. Lauren's name. Fiancée. Spring wedding. 3 years. Daniel picking her up at the gate. Karen listened without interrupting, which was one of the reasons I had always trusted her. When I finished, there was a silence on the line that was longer than a pause and shorter than a decision. Don't confront him, she said. I wasn't planning to. I know you weren't. I'm saying it out loud because the plan you're about to describe requires a specific kind of discipline to execute, and it's worth naming explicitly. She was right. It almost always was. What do I need to build? I asked. 3 categories, she said. Financial dissipation. Evidence that marital assets have been redirected without your knowledge or consent. Documented deception. The pattern, the timeline, communications you can legally access. And establishment of a separate household. Anything he's building outside the marriage using shared resources. I wrote the words down in the notebook I kept by the stove for grocery lists. 3 columns. I have always thought better in columns. Don't touch his personal devices, she continued. Don't photograph anything that isn't yours to photograph. You have legal access to joint accounts, statements sent to this address, public business registrations. That's where you start. Build the record before you say a single word to him. Every piece of evidence you gather legally is one less argument he can make. She paused, and when she continued, her voice had dropped into the register she used for the things that mattered most. Here is what happens if you don't do this carefully. The moment he knows you know, he starts moving things. He calls his accountant. He creates documentation to support a counter-narrative. He may even file first, with a story already written, and you spend the next 3 years correcting it, one hearing at a time. I have watched that happen to very smart women because they acted when they were ready rather than when they were prepared. Don't be one of those women. How solid does it need to be? Solid enough that he cannot reframe it, Karen said. Right now, if you walk in tonight, he controls the narrative. He has had 3 years of practice telling a version of his life in which you are a background character. Don't give him another audience for it. I looked at the cold dinner. At the carnations on the counter, a new arrangement Daniel had brought home 2 days ago, for no occasion, which I now understood was not affection but management. I opened the banking app, not out of anger. I want to be precise about that. Because anger is what people assume and the assumption is almost always wrong. Anger is reactive. It burns the evidence along with the house. What I had was something quieter and more structural. The same focus that arrives when the mission parameters become clear and everything that is not the mission falls away. For the first 2 hours, I found nothing I didn't already know. Groceries, utilities, gas, the dry cleaning pickup I had asked him to handle, ordinary expenses, ordinary record of a marriage that functioned on the surface with the smooth efficiency of a system no one had bothered to inspect. Then I found the pattern. 11 transfers, over 14 months, each coded as consulting expenses or professional development. The recipient account, KL Advisory LLC. Amounts ranging from $3,200 to $12,000. I opened a second window. Business registration for KL Advisory LLC. Registered agent, Lauren M. Kessler. I sat with that for a moment, then I kept going. A jeweler in Georgetown, $38,400. On the investment card I had not touched in 18 months. A furniture store in Arlington, $11,200. An interior design consultation, $4,800. And then, at 9:47 that evening, a document I had not known to look for until I found it. A real estate purchase agreement for a 4-bedroom waterfront property in Chesapeake, Virginia. Earnest money deposit of $72,500, drawn from the joint investment account Daniel managed. In the field marked marital status, directly below his printed name was one word. Single. 16 years. 6 letters. My phone buzzed on the counter. Running late. Project meeting stretched. Don't wait up, D. I looked at the message, then at the purchase agreement on my screen. I took the screenshot as I had taken 11 others that evening. I opened a blank document, typed the date, and began the timeline. I forwarded everything to Karen before midnight. The following morning, Daniel came home at 6:14. I heard the front door because I had been awake since 3. Not because I couldn't sleep, but because there were things I needed to think through that required the particular quality of silence that only existed before sunrise. He moved through the house with the careful quietness of a man who had practiced this arrival enough times to have a system. Shoes off at the door. Jacket draped over the kitchen chair, never the closet. The shower at 6:17, off at 6:29. By the time he came into the bedroom, I had been lying still with my eyes closed and my breathing slow, and even for 12 minutes. He stood at the edge of the bed. I could feel him looking at me, the specific weight of someone's attention in a dark room. Then he leaned down and pressed his mouth to my temple. Lightly, the way you kiss something you're trying not to wake. I didn't move. At breakfast, he looked tired in the self-satisfied way of a man who had ended a long evening exactly as he'd planned. He poured coffee and scrolled his phone and talked about the meeting running long, certain clients and their inefficiency with time, the inherent problem with working dinners that turned into working late. Long night, I said. Brutal. He rubbed the back of his neck. But productive. Some conversations need to happen face to face. Which group? A pause so small it required training to hear. Defense tech people. Private capital side. A new network I've been building toward. Sounds important. He smiled. Everything worth doing is. He kissed me on the forehead before he left. His cologne was the one he had worn on our first anniversary. For many years it had smelled like a specific memory. Now it smelled like a specific lie, which is a different thing that occupies the same space. I stood at the kitchen counter after the door closed and allowed myself exactly 30 seconds of something I did not name out loud. Then I went to work. At the office, Lauren was already at her desk. The photo of Daniel sat beside her monitor. She had added a small potted lavender plant since Monday. She looked up with a smile that contained no complexity whatsoever. Good morning. Morning, I said. Around mid-morning, she rolled her chair slightly toward the partition. Can I ask you something personal? Go ahead. Do you think people can really know each other if they spend long stretches apart? I looked up from the contract I was reviewing. Depends on who's doing the apart. She thought about that. Daniel says physical presence is the foundation of real intimacy. He says people who build relationships across distance are building something more like a story than an actual partnership. She paused. I think he's right, but I'm also aware I'm biased because he's saying it to someone he's planning to come home to every night. Maybe, I said. She turned back to her screen, satisfied. What Daniel had not told her, what he had perhaps forgotten, or more likely decided was no longer useful, was that he had said something nearly opposite to me once in the second year of our marriage, the night before my first deployment. He had held my face in both hands and told me that distance was only geography, and that geography had never stopped anything worth stopping. I had carried that sentence through 2 deployments, and 4 cross-country relocations, and 14 change-of-station disruptions. I had repeated it to myself in places where the alternative was to stop functioning. The cruelest thing about being handed a beautiful lie is how long you spend defending it to other people. The following Thursday, she came back from lunch 20 minutes late with a look on her face I had come to recognize. The specific, slightly self-conscious warmth of someone who had just spent 60 minutes with a person they were in love with. "Sorry," she said, dropping into her chair. Daniel surprised me. He was in the area. "No need to apologize." She tucked her hair behind her ear. "He does that sometimes, shows up. He says married people stop doing that, and he wants to make sure we never do." She paused, then looked at me with the half-apologetic expression that people use when they realize they've said something that might land wrong. "I don't mean that as a comment on anyone. I just think he's very intentional about things." "He sounds like it," I said. She nodded and turned to her monitor. Then, as if the thought had been waiting in line, "He said something today I've been thinking about. He said the reason most marriages fail is that people start treating each other like infrastructure, like electricity. They stop noticing it's there until it stops working." I looked at my screen. "He may be right about that," I said, not because I believed he was right in the way he intended, but because the sentence was true and its truth had an irony so precise it could have cut glass. Daniel had not noticed me the way he noticed Lauren. But I had not noticed what I was not noticing either. That was the parts that stayed with me in the small hours of the morning when sleep wouldn't come, and the kitchen was the only room that felt like mine. I had been infrastructure, and I had told myself that infrastructure was dignity. I was still deciding whether I had been wrong. On Wednesday of the second week, Lauren came in carrying a garment bag over one arm and an expression that belonged to someone keeping a pleasant secret. "Daniel is presenting his company to investors next week," she said, "at the Meridian Hall in Richmond. He says it's a small reception, but that's what he says when he means the opposite." I set down my pen. "His company. Holloway Strategic Group." She said it with a pride that was entirely her own. She had not created the name, but she had adopted it the way you adopt the things that belong to a future you've already decided on. Defense Logistics Advisory, private sector modernization. He's been building it for months. He wants me involved after the wedding, operations side. Holloway, our name. The one I had carried for 16 years. The one that had never been only his. "When is the reception?" I asked. "Thursday evening, 8 o'clock. Do you have the address?" She gave it to me without any suspicion whatsoever, because she had no reason to have any. I wrote it in the margin of my legal pad, beneath the notes I had been keeping on a procurement audit that would now wait. 3 days before the reception, Karen called me during my lunch break. I sat in my car with the windows up. "The business formation documents for Holloway Strategic Group list Daniel as principal," she said, "and Lauren Kessler as director of operations, with a 25% profit interest vesting upon their marriage. The initial capitalization traces directly to your joint investment account. In Virginia, redirecting marital assets to fund a separate household and business without your knowledge or consent is textbook dissipation. The property agreement seals it. He listed himself as single on a transaction funded by shared assets. That alone is enough to seek emergency financial restraints." A pause. "I filed a preliminary injunction this morning at 3:47 p.m. The court will review by end of week." I looked at the parking lot. 2 soldiers were loading equipment into a van, laughing at something I couldn't hear. Ordinary Tuesday. "Are you planning to attend the reception?" Karen asked. "General Stanton invited me, through official channels." A beat. "How?" "Holloway Strategic Group listed defense advisory affiliations in their investor materials. Stanton saw the Holloway name and reached out through my command contact, assuming I had some professional connection to the firm. He wants to make introductions. He had no idea I was unaware the firm existed." Another silence, this one carrying a specific texture. "Meg, if you go, I'm not going to make a scene. I know that. I'm worried the room will make one on your behalf." "Let the room do what it does," I said. "I'll present facts if asked. I won't accuse. I won't block exits. I'll let him explain himself. He won't be able to." "No," I said, "he won't." That Thursday evening, I dressed with the same deliberateness I brought to command ceremonies. Not elaborate. Precise. A dark charcoal blazer over a cream blouse, Navy slacks, low heels. Hair pinned back cleanly, the wedding band on my left hand, because Daniel had spent 3 years presenting himself to investors as a single man building something new, and I intended to walk into a room and let my presence correct record without dedicating a single word to the task. My left shoulder was tight when I got dressed. I rolled it twice, the way the physical therapist had shown me in 2012, and went back to the mirror. I sat at the kitchen table for 7 minutes before I left, not to reconsider, just to be still. The drive to Richmond took 49 minutes. I parked in the structure adjacent to the Meridian Hall at 7:48, 12 minutes before Daniel's 8 o'clock reception start. 12 minutes was also, I calculated, approximately 11 minutes after he would have finished whatever final instructions he needed to give. I know now, because Lauren told me in the email she sent 6 weeks after that evening, that those were Daniel's exact words as they crossed the lobby together. Don't mention her military career tonight. It makes people ask questions I don't need. Lauren wrote that she had not understood, at the time, who the her referred to. She had assumed it was an old colleague, someone whose presence might complicate a professional evening. She had nodded and agreed, because that was the relationship she had been given. One in which Daniel managed the context and she trusted the management. She understood later that she had been handed a script in which another woman's life was simply cut from the scene. I stepped through the lobby doors at 7:51. The Meridian Hall was precisely the kind of venue that a certain type of defense-adjacent ambition rented when it wanted to project that it had already arrived. High ceilings, warm recessed lighting, white tablecloths, small floral arrangements that would photograph well. The bar was open. The networking hum was steady. The particular sound of a room full of people who were there to be seen by other people who were also there to be seen. I gave my name to the registration attendant. She looked at her tablet, then at me with the professional neutrality of someone who was very carefully not reacting. General Stanton asked that you be brought to him directly. I thanked her and walked into the ballroom. I saw them in the first 10 seconds. Daniel in a charcoal suit that cost enough to signal success without announcing a price. Lauren beside him in a deep blue dress, holding a glass of sparkling water with the careful posture of someone ready for anything. He was talking to 2 men in dark jackets, both leaning slightly forward in the way of people who have heard something they came to hear. His back was half turned to the entrance. My left shoulder pulled once, tight and released. I crossed the room toward General Stanton. Howard Stanton stood when he saw me from across the room. He was 63 years old and had the posture of someone who had never stopped believing that standing up when someone entered was not a courtesy but a basic fact about how to be in a room with another person. He crossed to me in 8 steps and took my hand in both of his. Colonel Holloway, his voice carried without effort. I'm glad you came. I reached out through official channels. I hope that wasn't too formal. Perfectly fine, sir. When I saw the Holloway name in the firm's materials, I assumed you were somehow connected to this project. He studied my face with the attention of someone who filed what he noticed rather than announcing it. I thought it made sense to meet properly. I am connected, I said, in a way, a beat. He was too experienced to ask what I meant. He simply noted it and continued. Let me introduce you to. Across the room, Daniel turned. I watched his body understand before his face did. The recognition arrived in his neck and his hands first. A stillness, then a recalibration so fast it would have been invisible to someone who hadn't spent years watching people process the gap between the situation they expected and the one they were in. He moved toward me. Meg, he said it quietly. The practice warmth still present but pressurized, the way warmth sounds when it's doing the work of something else. This is a surprise. I was invited, I said. By whom? By me, Stanton said pleasantly. From 3 feet to my left. Daniel's eyes moved to the general. Something moved across his face that was not quite a smile, and not quite the absence of one. General Stanton, thank you for coming. I wasn't aware that you and Meg were. We go back 14 years, Stanton said. I pinned her bronze star, Kandahar Theater. She had pulled 3 soldiers out of a blast radius before the follow-on team arrived, with a piece of that device still lodged in her shoulder. It's a matter of public record if you're curious. A pause, entirely controlled. I wasn't aware you 2 were acquainted. We're married, I said. The sentence went into the room the way a fire suppression system activates. Completely, simultaneously, and with no particular interest in what it damaged on the way down. Lauren had appeared at Daniel's shoulder. The glass of sparkling water in her hand did not move, but her hand wrapped around the stem went completely still. Not confused, not disbelieving, just absorbing. Married, she said, the word held for a moment at the center of the room. For 16 years, I said. Lauren's eyes moved from me to Daniel, and then back again, and the thing that happened in her face in the space of those 2 seconds was not something I will try to describe in full. She had been handed a story, and had lived inside it, and had been by every indication entirely happy in it. She had been told she was the central character. She was now discovering that another woman had been in the story the entire time. That was not her fault. That was not something I had any satisfaction in. Daniel turned toward her. Lauren, 3 years, she said. Not loud, just precise. You said your marriage ended before we met. It's more complicated then. Was she your wife when you proposed to me? He didn't answer fast enough. That was answer enough. The room rearranged itself. Not dramatically. People did not gasp. Glasses did not shatter. The thing that happened was subtler and more permanent. Conversations stopped. Attention reorganized itself toward the center of the room, and the specific quality of silence that falls when something factual is being established replaced the comfortable hum of networking. Stanton did not raise his voice. He didn't need to. Mr. Holloway, he said, I came tonight because your materials referenced a strategic defense advisory capacity that I believed had your wife's professional background behind it. Her name carries weight in the rooms you're trying to enter. I assumed she was a partner in this venture. The firm is my project, Daniel said. His voice was still controlled. I gave him that. Meg's name carries in defense circles regardless of whether she's directly. She is a colonel with a combat citation and 16 years of logistics command, Stanton said with the precision of someone reading from a record they have personally verified. Her name carries because she built something, not because it's attached to yours. From across the room, a chair moved. A man stood up, Robert Crane, retired Army colonel. We had overlapped at Fort Campbell in 2014 during a logistics quench restructuring that had required 18-hour days for 6 consecutive weeks. He crossed the room with the particular stride of someone who has decided something. Meg Holloway, he said. I didn't know your name was on this. It is, I said. In a way. He looked at Daniel with the neutrality that functions, in certain professional cultures, as a complete verdict. I told this story at a retirement dinner 3 years ago, Crane said, speaking to Stanton and to the room, and, most precisely, to Daniel. In 2014, when we had the supply chain failure before the October rotation, Meg ran a 62-hour coordination without leaving the building. She had a cot brought in and ate what the junior staff ate. When I asked her why she didn't delegate and go home, she said the people doing the work needed to know that whoever was in charge was also doing the work. He paused. I've worked in this business for 31 years. That's a shorter list than you'd think. He extended his hand to me. I took it. Daniel was watching with an expression that had stopped being composed. The attorney handling Holloway Strategic Group's formation documents was already at the far end of the room, speaking quietly and specifically into her phone. Lauren stood beside the nearest table with her hand resting on the tablecloth, the stillness of someone who has found the one thickest point in a room that has started moving. I opened my bag. The folder Karen had assembled contained 17 pages. Transfers, business formation records, the property purchase agreement, and a 1-page summary from the forensic accounting firm that laid out the dissipation timeline in language so direct it required no interpretation. I handed the summary to Stanton. The property agreement to the attorney. The transfer records to Crane, who took them without a word and began reading. These documents don't tell the complete picture, Daniel said. What picture? Stanton said without inflection. Explains listing yourself as single on a property funded by joint marital assets. Silence. What picture? The attorney added quietly, stepping back toward the table. Explains a 25% profit interest for a co-founder on a venture that carries a name tied to a marriage that was not disclosed as legally complicated. The host, who had been preparing to introduce Daniel for the main presentation, stepped away from the podium. 2 investors near the back began the specific series of small movements that people make when they are recalculating risk. One of them reached for his jacket. Another leaned toward his attorney and said something I was not close enough to hear. Lauren removed the ring. She didn't make an announcement. She didn't look at anyone. She simply took it off, slowly, deliberately, with the same care she had used to pick up Dantio's photograph on my first morning at Fort Belvoir, and set it on the white tablecloth beside a water glass. "I would like someone to call me a car," she said to no one in particular. A member of the venue staff moved immediately. Daniel looked at her. For the first time that evening, his face broke. "Lauren, please don't," she said. "Not here." She walked toward the lobby with the posture of someone who had decided in the space of 4 minutes that she was going to be fine eventually, and that eventually was not tonight, and that this was a fact she could work with. I watched her go. She didn't look back. By 9:37, the reception had dissolved. Not with confrontation. Not with raised voices or shattered glassware. With quiet exits, declined handshakes, and the efficient departure of people who understood risk and had identified one. 3 investors stopped to acknowledge Stanton as they left. 2 of them nodded at me in the off-rates of the in certain rooms. One handed me a business card and said, with the brevity of someone who had said enough, "Call me when you're ready." Crane found me near the window overlooking the street. "You all right?" he asked. "Working on it," I said. He nodded once. That was enough. Stanton held my coat as I put it on, a gesture so old-fashioned and deliberate it nearly undid something I had been holding carefully together all evening. "You could have handled this very differently," he said. "I know," I said. "Most people would have." I looked at him. "Most people didn't build what I built." He inclined his head, then. "I hope the shoulder doesn't bother you tonight." I paused. I had not mentioned the shoulder to him in 14 years. "It barely does anymore," I said. He smiled, small and tired and entirely genuine. "Good." The legal consequences arrive the way legal consequences do. Not in a single dramatic moment, but through filings and hearings and phone calls from title companies, and the quiet, relentless movement of information between people whose job it was to understand what the information meant. Daniel tried to manage it. In the days that followed. That was the word he would have used. He called 2 of the investors directly. He reached out to the event host. He sent a message through his attorney suggesting that the evening hadn't been a private matter that had become unnecessarily public, and that the professional merits of Holloway Strategic Group should be evaluated on their own terms. Remained silent. The response did not come back through his attorney. It came back through the absence of further contact. Which is considerably smaller than it appears from the outside, and has a longer institutional memory than most industries. Reputation functions the way structural steel functions. You don't think about it until something stresses it, and then you think about nothing else. Daniel had used our name to open a door. He had not calculated that the name came with a record, and that the record was not his. The court's preliminary review of the injunction moved forward within 4 days. The Chesapeake property sale collapsed before it could close. The title company, in the professional voice of someone delivering news they had delivered before, explained that the purchase agreement had been placed under review pending resolution of a marital property dispute, and that the seller had elected to relist rather than wait. Holloway Strategic Group never opened its doors. The investors, who had been in the ballroom at the Meridian Hall, did not move forward. Daniel's existing consulting contracts came under scrutiny, not because I asked anyone to look, but because the court proceedings became part of the public record, and the people in this business pay attention to public records. 3 clients requested updated conflict of interest disclosures. 1 paused their engagement pending review. The network that he had spent 6 months carefully building went quiet without announcement, the way professional networks do when they have processed something and decided to process it privately. He had used our name to open a door he could not walk through cleanly. That was his choice. The door was also mine, and it was still standing. The jeweler had a return policy for unworn pieces. Lauren, through her own attorney, initiated that process. The full $38,400 was deposited into a temporary escrow account pending asset division. Karen's forensic accountant worked with the court to establish the full recoverable figure. Not every dollar. Some of what had been spent was spent. Dinners, travel, the particular expenses of a life built on someone else's resources. But a substantial portion of what had been redirected from our shared accounts was traceable. documented, and recovered. Karen had said, early in our conversations, that the difference between a clear record and an unclear one was the difference between a negotiation and a rout. She was right. She was almost always right. She also said something I thought about for a long time afterward. Discipline isn't coldness, she said, during one of our later calls. You know the difference. A lot of people in your situation mistake composure, feeling it. They think that because you're not breaking down, something must be missing. I'm feeling it, I said. I know you are, she said. That's not what I'm saying. I'm saying the feeling and the function can exist at the same time. You're proof of that. I did not know how to answer that. I still don't, entirely. What I know is that she was right, that they can exist at the same time. What I also know is that the function comes first, not because the feeling doesn't matter, but because the function is what protects the things the feeling is about. Outside the Meridian Hall, Daniel found me on the sidewalk. He hadn't brought his coat. The Richmond night was cold in the way October nights are cold along the river, clean and direct, no negotiation about it. He was still in the charcoal suit, and the cold was catching up to him. Meg. His voice was different now. The professional register had come off with the room. What was underneath it was someone I had not heard in a long time. Not the person from the care packages and the anniversary champagne, but something quieter and more honest than either. I turned and waited, because some things need to be said out loud even when they are already obvious. I was going to tell you, he said. After the house closed? He looked at the pavement. I needed everything to be settled first. I thought if I had something built, something already in place, you wouldn't have to worry about any of it. I worried about you, I said, for 16 years. That's a different kind of worry. He ran his hand through his hair. I know. Did you? He didn't answer. You didn't list yourself as single on a legal document because you ran out of time to tell me, I said. You listed yourself as single because you had already decided what the story was. And in that story, I wasn't in it. He was quiet for a long time. When he spoke again, his voice had lost the last of its professional restraint, which meant it had also lost the last of its defensibility. I never felt like your equal, he said. I want you to know that's not an excuse. But it's the truth. From the day you made Major, I felt like I was watching a person become something I could never be. I kept waiting for that feeling to stop. It didn't. It just got quieter. And somewhere in the quiet, I stopped waiting and started doing something else. I stayed with that for a moment. Not because I didn't have an answer, but because some things deserve the weight of a real pause before they're answered. Did you ever tell me you were struggling? I asked. No. Did you ever ask me to slow down? No. Then I didn't know, I said. And that was your choice. Not mine, not the Army's. Yours. He looked at me with the expression of someone who had prepared for anger and received something harder to argue with. You never seemed to need anything, he said. You were always enough on your own. I looked at him for a moment in the cold Richmond air, and I thought about the porch light on the timer, the one I had set years ago so there would always be something lit when I came home late from wherever the Army had sent me. A small act of care for my own returning, because I had not known how to ask for someone else to be the one waiting. That, I said quietly, is the most expensive misreading of a person you will ever make. I walked to my car. At 10:23 that night, driving north on the interstate with the heat on and the radio off, my phone rang. Patricia Holloway. Daniel's mother. I had known Patricia for 16 years. She was a careful woman, precise in her opinions, deliberate in her affections, and committed to a private belief that military life was something women pursued for the lack of better options. She had never been openly cruel to me. She had simply maintained a particular distance, polite and consistent, that I had spent years attempting to cross. I had brought food to her house when her hip surgery kept her home, from 7 different time zones. I had sent on the right flowers for the right occasions, because I had paid attention to what the right flowers were, and because paying attention was the tool I had when other tools weren't available. She had received all of it without warmth and without comment. I had told myself it was her way. I understood on the drive home from Richmond that it was also his decision. I answered. Margaret. Her voice was the same as it had always been. 69 years of measured. Patricia, I heard what happened tonight. A pause. Howard Stanton's wife is in my book club. I want you to know that. I see. Another pause, longer. I should also tell you, because I think you deserve that after everything I knew. Daniel told me 8 months ago. What he was doing. What he was planning. I said nothing. I want you to understand my reasoning, she said. I didn't think it was cruelty. I believed genuinely that you had always been built for something larger than what the two of you had together. That you would be better without it. Without him. And you decided that for me, I said. I thought. Without asking me. Without giving me the information I needed to make my own choice about my own life. A long silence. You always seemed so capable, she said finally. Something in the phrase might have been reaching toward an apology. It was dressed in a way that was not quite ready to be one. I never imagined that you needed, that you would want. Everyone wants to be seen, Patricia, I said. Not because they need to be held up, because they've earned the right to be noticed. The line was quiet for a moment that stretched past comfortable. I hope you're all right, she said finally. I will be, I said. Eventually. I ended the call. I thought about Patricia for a long time after that, on the drive and in the weeks that followed. Not with anger, though anger would have been understandable. With something more like the exhaustion of seeing clearly. She had looked at a capable person and decided that capability was its own sufficient company. She had looked at someone who carried things quietly and concluded that the quiet meant the carrying wasn't heavy. That is the particular blindness that gets inherited, generation to generation, by families that mistake strength for independence and independence for not needing anything at all. It is not always malicious. That's what makes it so durable. I pulled into the driveway in Alexandria at 11:49. The porch light was on because it was always on. I had put it on a timer years ago so there would be something lit whenever I came home late from wherever the army had sent me. A small act of care for my own returning. I sat in the car with the engine running for 4 minutes. Not deciding anything. Not avoiding anything. Just sitting in the space between what had ended and what had not yet begun, giving both things the weight they were owed. That's something. They don't tell you about the aftermath of a crisis. It requires its own kind of discipline, too. The discipline of not reaching forward into the future before you've finished standing in the present. The discipline of letting the 4 minutes be 4 minutes and not a lifetime of accounting. The engine idled in the dark. The porch light stayed on. Then I turned the car off, went inside, and started the rest of it. 3 months. That was the distance between the reception and a point I would call stable, though not finished. These things are rarely finished in the way people want them to be. They reach a kind of resolution that makes functioning possible, and that has to be enough. The court-ordered freeze held. The Chesapeake property collapsed. Holloway Strategic Group dissolved before it opened. What remained of the redirected assets, roughly 64 cents on every dollar that had left our joint accounts without my knowledge, was recoverable. It was not everything. It was enough. I kept the house in Alexandria. I kept my name because Holloway was mine too, and had been mine longer than it had been convenient for him. Lauren sent me an email 6 weeks after the reception, 2 paragraphs. The first was an apology, careful, genuine, specific in its acknowledgement that her presence in Daniel's life had been built on his choices, not hers. The second was 1 sentence. I hope you get back everything he should never have taken. I read it twice. Then I wrote back 2 words. I know. I mean both things by that. I know she didn't orchestrate anything. And I know what she's lost. Understanding something and releasing it are not the same transaction. They don't happen on the same schedule. I have learned to accept that. On the first Monday of December, I drove past the parade field at Fort Belvoir on my way into the office. The ground was hard with early frost. The flag was going up at the east end of the field, slow and steady in the still, cold air. 2 soldiers in PT gear ran the perimeter path without talking. Ordinary morning. Ordinary base. The kind of Monday that exists in the thousands and is forgotten in the thousands, except for the ones where you notice something you've been seeing for years without seeing it. I thought about Lauren's desk, the silver picture frame, the morning light, the face I had known longer and differently than she had, and what it had cost both of us to find out the difference. I thought about what it had taken to sit by that desk every morning for 2.5 weeks and do the work in front of me while knowing what I knew. People sometimes ask, when they hear the broad outline of this story, how I managed to keep going in normally. The honest answer is that I had been trained to separate the function from the feeling for the duration of a mission, and then to give the feeling its due afterward. when the mission was complete, and the people who depended on me no longer needed my full capacity directed outward. That is what military discipline actually is at its best. Not the absence of emotion, the careful management of its timing. Grief and anger, and the particular devastation of seeing yourself through someone else's constructed story, those are real. They have weight and duration, and they do not disappear because you decide to defer them. And the deferral can create the space in which you make decisions with your judgment rather than your pain. That is the lesson I carry out of 16 years that I wish I had understood in year 1. Some truths arrive as photographs on other people's desks. You don't choose when they come. You only choose what you do when they arrive. My left shoulder has been quieter lately. I've stopped tracking the weather by it the way I used to. Or maybe the weather has just been fair. I'm not sure which, and I've decided it doesn't matter. Respect is not a feeling. That is the thing I have come to know, with a certainty that has replaced almost everything I thought I understood about marriage. Respect is a practice, daily, specific, not contingent on whether the person you're practicing it toward happens to be present in the room. It is the difference between loving someone and treating their life as if it matters as much as yours. Between saying you're proud and doing the things that demonstrate it. Between showing up and showing up when it costs you something. Daniel loved me, in whatever way he was capable of. He did not respect me, and no amount of love, not the care packages, or the anniversary champagne, or the handwriting on the labels, compensates for the daily ongoing choice to make someone's life smaller than it is. To decide that her capability means she doesn't need to be seen. To use her name and her trust as raw material for something she was never invited into. The cruelest thing about being underestimated by someone who loves you is that they don't believe they're doing it. They call it knowing you. If you've been sitting with something of your own while you listen to this, a question you've been carrying, a situation that looked different from the inside than it did once you stepped back, I'd like to hear from you. Drop a comment and tell me where you're listening from, or tell me what you would have done, or just say hello. These conversations matter to me. And if this story reached something in someone you know, someone who has been holding something together quietly for a very long time, share it with them. Because the people who carry things without asking for recognitions deserve at least once to hear that someone noticed. A note before you go. The financial and legal mechanisms in this story, marital asset dissipation, joint account documentation, property disclosure fraud, and preliminary injunctions, are real instruments used every day by family law attorneys across the United States. Laws differ significantly from state to state, and what applies in Virginia may be structured differently where you live. If anything in this story made you think about your own situation, please do not make decisions based on what you heard here. Sit down with a licensed family law attorney in your state before taking any action. The American Bar Association maintains a lawyer referral directory at AmericanBar.org if you need help finding one. If you are in an unsafe situation, the National Domestic Violence Hotline is available at 1-800-799-7233, 24 hours a day. I am not a lawyer, and nothing in this story is legal or financial advice. I am someone who wanted to tell a story about what it costs to be strong in a world that mistakes strength for not needing anything. The people who hold things together quietly deserve the same consideration they give to everyone else. That is not a small thing to know.